Hi, this is Jim Gibson with Business Sense Podcast. Thank you for watching me today. I very much appreciate it. And of course, Business Sense Podcast, we're going to talk about all things concerning business, and in some cases in particular to the IT field or technical field. But basically, if you're looking for information on particular parts or how to hook up a computer, this is not the video for you. This is for those who are interested in starting a business and to people who are in business and would like to do better or see what other people in business are thinking. This is for you. Now, my last podcast, I talked about wealth. Your viewpoint of wealth determines how you handle money. And the other thing is greed. What is greed? Well, greed is sort of like a form of theft. And being greedy is wanting something that you haven't worked for or you don't deserve. So they're interesting podcasts. Maybe you might want to go back and look at it. But today we're going to talk about the top 5 things that wealthy business owners do that the poor business owners, if they're still in business, don't do. And so the most important one is going to be at the 5th one, the last one. Of course, if you listen to the end, you get to hear the last one. And this will help you in business. This is things that personally that I think are the top 5 things. And of course, as I already said, I was in business for 30 years with no voice and data systems, and I got a master's in business administration. I learned a lot there, and I'm also a former Marine Corps captain, so I learned a lot about people, management, things like that. So I have a lot of experience, and I've always been successful in the businesses I started. I got a lot of side business too that I really enjoy doing, cable supply, real estate, things like that. And we'll talk about that on some future podcasts, why you should have more than one business, especially real estate. Passive income is amazing. So at any rate, let's start with the top 5 things. But before we go on, smash that like button, okay, and subscribe. And that really helps out the site. It helps me generate more views, and at the same time you get the latest and greatest when it comes to how to run a business, small business, medium business, and heck, I'm even going to talk about some large businesses. I was part of a management group on a business that had an income of well over $250 million a year, so I've learned a lot there also, and we'll talk about that some other podcasts. But today we're going to talk about the top 5 things that wealthy small business owners, medium business owners, or any business owner do and know that poor business owners do not know. And I want to start out with and this is what prompted me on this, was a Bible verse that I was reading in Proverbs 27, verse 23, 24. You can look it up. It says, know the condition of your flocks, give careful attention to your herds. You know, back then, small business owners were shepherds, things like that. In the Bible, it really talks about the free market, which is fantastic. And it talks a lot about business. It talks a lot about small business, things like that. And then the second part of the verses says, for riches do not endure forever, and a crown is not secure for all generations. So it says, no, you're supposed to know the condition of your flocks. And again, back then, flocks were, a man, woman, whatever, that was a shepherd and took care of their sheep. It was usually a family business. If they managed their sheep right and the conditions were correct, they could grow and they could do better. They could sell sheep and whatever else they sell. I don't know anything about farming. Thankful that there's food in the supermarket. I don't know anything about farming or cattle or anything else. But it's a great idea there. It applies to small business. So if you're a small business owner, you got to know certain things and you got to do certain things. And so let's get started on the 5 things. And again, the best one's going to be at the end. So pay attention to the end. But the first one is customers. It's just amazing that some business owners don't pay much attention to their customers. I used to pay a lot of attention, probably not enough. So I've learned some lessons in this area too. But one of the things that I've learned looking at it strategically, when I looked at my customers, one of the things I learned was that old 80-20 rule. I don't know if you've heard about that before, that 80% of your income comes from 20% of your customers or something you're doing. So 20% of what you're doing produces 80% of your income. And of course, it's the other way around too. 80% of the time that you spend or the customers you have, or 20% of the 80-20 rule is this, that very small percentage of your customers produce the majority of your income. And you got to know that. So therefore, it should cause you to think about the customers that are producing the majority of income. And sometimes you should think about firing some customers. There's a lot of customers that just cost me a lot of money, cost me a lot of time with employees, servicing those individuals, those businesses, and maybe someone else can service them better. Or they were too far away. They were 50 miles away, but I didn't want to give them up. So I would allow someone to sit in traffic for an hour and a half to go out there and work on one piece of item. The computer system needed work or something like that. Or we had to pull one cable and everything else. By the time they had windshield time back, there was absolutely no money in it for my company. And so that's one thing, the 80-20 rule. You got to pay attention to the 80-20 rule. And you got to make a decision. Who is your customer? It's kind of interesting. I was working with a business right now, and they're a really good business. I mean, he's very profitable and everything else. And I was asking him about his customers, why he wasn't going after a certain type of customer. And it was just the average, middle class business type of thing. And nothing wrong with that, by the way. I'm not trying to be derogatory. But what he said to me is, he says, it's a lot easier dealing with millionaires. I thought, yeah. He goes, they don't question anything I do. And I thought, wow, that's kind of interesting. He goes, something? I just give them, a contract and tell them what I'm going to do. And they usually just sign off on it. And I don't have to go line by line by line of every single part. And can I cut here and can I cut there? He goes, I don't go through all that stuff. And I got enough customers to keep me happy and I'm making a nice profit. And so he had a really good idea. Who are your customers? And what is the purpose to have that particular customer? Now with me, I had local customers that were all over Southern California. And they were great, by the way. I loved them. But I also had national accounts. So I worked for a handful of large corporations that have multiple locations throughout the U.S. And we would, and a lot of them were retail. So we'd go into this proposed retail store and we would cable it and things like that and get it all ready for, an install of telephone systems, computer networks, whatever else they needed me to do, I would do. And I found out that they were very profitable. And the reason why they were very profitable is, one, every single store was a cookie cutter. Or every single office was a cookie cutter. So I knew exactly what they needed. I knew exactly how long it would take. I knew exactly the parts I needed. I already priced them out, and the customer already knew exactly what I was going to charge even before I quoted them. They had a quote sheet they could check off on, I need 5 telephones and I need this, I need, 10 locations cabled, and they knew exactly what it was according to contract. No negotiations, no additional sales necessary. So all I needed to do is just go in and sell, or just go in and install. Very little selling. In fact, my selling was basically taking them out to lunch and keeping the relationship up and working on that, making sure I'm treating them right. So, around Christmas time, send them some cheeses or something like that. Chocolate. Send their office a big bundle of chocolate and stuff like that. You can come up with ideas. But it's know the condition of my customers. So, that's the idea there. And so I'd spend a lot of time talking to them. I'd spend a lot of time talking about their business and how they were doing. One of the largest businesses I worked on did over 800 locations for a company called AmeriQuest Mortgage. And if you remember back in 2005, 2006, the crash happened. A lot of people say, well, it happened in 2008. For me, it happened in 2005. They called up and they said, "Hey, Jim, we're going out of business by 5 o'clock today." So, well, we're in the middle of installing 10 systems throughout the United States. And they said, "Yeah, we'll pay you for all of them. Make sure you get us the invoices by the end of the month. We will be paying all our invoices." So they were a good customer. And I probably wish I could replace them in a short period of time. But that 20%, the big corporations didn't want to haggle with me over a nickel and dime to death. I didn't have to send a salesman out 3 times to sell a system that was $500 or $600. I can sell them one time and socialize with them for years and years and years and just keep them informed, things like that. Then I'll have a video on how to keep customers informed and what you should do and how you should do it and everything else. The next thing is your product. What product are you selling? Is it a service? Is it a piece of equipment? You should know it inside and out. So when I would sell telephone systems, I knew how to program them up to a certain point. Once we got so large and they had so many increases, no, I generally knew how they were programmed, things like that. But when I first started out, I knew every single thing about my product, and I knew how to modify it to fit the customer's needs. And that's what you need to know. You need to be an expert on your product. So if it's a service, you should be an expert. And I heard someone say recently, and it made a lot of sense to me, what you should do is you should know every single position. You should be able to sell, you should be able to install, you should be able to schmooze with the customer, all these other things when it comes to your product. So that's number 2. Number 3, employees. I know this is going to sound rough, okay? Employees are not your personal friends. They can become friends to you if they're honest and they handle the work that you give them and everything else. But they have mortgages, they have expenses in their house. They're saving to send their kid to college or something like that. So don't rely on them to be investors in your business. Pay them on time and treat it as a business relationship. And you got to watch when you're hiring best friends, because I tell you what, best friends can quickly become a person who no longer talks to you when you have to let them go from there on out. Or if you're not treating them fairly with paying them on time, things like that. So you got to know your employees. You got to know what they're capable of doing. I had a technician one time that had no ability at all when it came to electronics. I remember one time I told him to ground a certain piece of equipment, and because we were getting static over it, and I don't know why we were getting noise and things like that over it. But I asked him to ground it, and he said he did it, and he was still having problems. So when I went out to test or to see what was going on, because remember, that's what you should do. You should know your products. So when I went out to talk to him about what was going on, and I looked, and the wire went from the equipment, and it went all the way down the drywall, and he took a drywall screw and just screwed it into the drywall. And I said, "Is that a ground? Is that your ground?" And he said, "Yeah." I said, "You realize the drywall is an insulator, and it's not going to work as a ground." And he said, "Well, I thought just attaching it to the building." Well, after about 2 or 3 of those incidences, we went out to lunch, and I said, "My friend, I don't think you're an IT guy. I don't think you're an IT installer. You might be a coder. Who knows? Go to coding camp, But if you want to be an IT, you're not going to be an installer of IT equipment." And he was a good guy. I hated to lose him, except that he cost money. So, know your employees, know their strengths, know their weaknesses. Something else too, if you can, you get too big, you can't, but, know their family situation and what motivates them and things like that. It's really good to know that. And of course, number 4, if you're going to be a successful in business and you really want to succeed and become wealthy, and there's nothing wrong with that goal, by the way, of becoming wealthy. There is a difference between being rich and being wealthy, and we're going to talk about that in another podcast in the future. And you should listen to that because there's a big difference between the two. You want to become wealthy and rich, not just rich. But anyway, if you want to become wealthy and you want to run a successful business, one of the things you got to have is you got to have goals, reasonable goals, even unreasonable goals. What are you going to do today? What are you going to do this week? What are you going to do next month? What are you going to do a year from now? What's your goal? What do you want to accomplish? They should be stretchable. They got that thing SMART goals, and you can look it up. That's pretty much out there. But you always want to have goals, financial goals, customer goals, how many customers you have, what size your business is, growing, things like that. So you want to have goals. They have to be written down. You should have a daily to-do list, or which probably are not goals, but it's probably a good idea to have anyway. I keep a book with me with my the things I need to do every day. What are my goals? And those goals are those to-do lists are attached to my goals. And so once a month, on the first of each month, I come up with what is my goals for this month. And I try to look at the end of the month to see if I've accomplished those goals or gotten closer. Without goals, you don't know where you're going, and you don't know what you're doing and what your priorities are. You got to have goals. And then here is the last one, the thing I told you to listen to the very end. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the thumbs up button, please. And if I had drums, I'd play the drums right now, and you're probably going to be surprised. One of the most important things in a business is an accounting system. I know some people are going to hang up right now. No, you got to listen now. It's important. You got to have an accounting system. Not just any system. There's a certain way you manage that, because that's going to tell you the condition of your herd, per se. That's going to tell you if you're having success and things like that. I had most of the time, or early on, I managed my own books. So I kept track of the invoices. I kept track of the bills and things like that. And again, if you watched my last video, you would hear me say, pay the bills ahead of time. Don't wait till the last minute. That really annoyed me when I had bookkeepers that would hold on to things, and I'd never instruct them to do that, but they would do it. I use QuickBooks in my business, still do it today. I use it for personal use also, and it is a fantastic software. You can use something else, and you can just use paper, Excel. Some people use Excel, but once you get a certain size, you're going to want to use a professional accounting system, and I found QuickBooks really works well. It's not inexpensive. It is expensive, especially the cloud one is expensive. But the thing that it's going to tell you, it's going to tell you where you're going, up or down, or making money or losing money, or you're not paying attention to the money, things like that. And what I would do, this is an inside thing. I don't know anyone else that did these things, but this really helped me. I would have my daily numbers, and it was just an Excel piece of paper. Now, of course, they were daily, and the real thing went into QuickBooks. And you can actually do this in QuickBooks, but I like doing it daily. I would get my bookkeeper to report on certain items, and the items I would get that person to report on is invoices. So if I wrote invoices on my customers, I wanted to know how many invoices were written today and how many are still outstanding. So I'd have written today, those that are still outstanding, things like that. And then I would have money in the bank accounts. Always had a couple bank accounts, and you should have it also. You should have a wire account that you pretty much keep empty, that people can wire into, and then you transfer out to to your running bank account, the ones you write checks on. And then once you hit a certain amount of money in that running bank account, you should take that money and stick it into savings of some sort. And sometimes I would have a couple savings accounts at different banks rather than keep them all in the same area. But I would have this sheet, so I would look at invoices that were made today. I would look at invoices, total amount that people would owe me. And then I would look at my bills, how many bills I was getting in. Now, in the last podcast, I talked about pay the bills as soon as you know that the vendor or the whatever the vendor is, parts vendor or labor vendor or whatever else, performed the work or delivered the parts, and you should. But what I meant by that also is you do check runs. You don't want to do your pull out the checkbook and write it out that instant type of thing. No, it's reasonable to have a check run once a week, and that's what I would do. So as soon as I knew that something should be paid, and then I did that check run. So I looked at money in the bank, savings accounts, things like that, checking accounts, things like that. Money that people owed me, I would have a total for that. Of course, the two sections, invoices that were done that day and invoices that were still unpaid. I would do all those things, and then I would come up with a bottom line, and that bottom line was really important to me. So I knew how much cash I had. I knew that if I had payroll coming up, I already had cash covered for a payroll or two. And in fact, you should have enough money in savings, in your savings, to cover you for at least 3 months if no customers pay you. So you should be able to pay all your bills, all your normal bills. You know how much you spend on rent. You know how much you spend on electricity, things like that. And in California, man, you need a special account for that electricity stuff. They're ridiculous. But you know how much you owe. You know what your payroll is generally at. So you're going to need enough money in savings to cover payroll for 3-6 months. I always had more than 6 months. So I could run my business. Even if the world fell apart, I had enough resources for 6 months. And I always had that philosophy is never ask someone to work for you unless you have the money already before they do the work to cover what they cost to do the work you're doing. So I already knew that I had enough money in the bank to cover payroll no matter what happened. And enough to cover rent no matter what happened. Enough to cover utilities, enough to cover parts, things like that. So you always have to have that reserve. Accounting's pretty important. That's about as close as you get to that Bible verse that talks about know the conditions of your flock. So it's not only customers, employees, and all the other things we talked about, but it's also particularly about your resources, knowing your resources. And so I had a daily report that my bookkeeper would have to fill out at the end of the day, and I know exactly what. Then at certain times, we had check run usually once a week, but you can do a check run more often than that. And if you want, you can do a check run every day. And one of the things I would do, let's say I would have a contractor in Cincinnati putting in a system for me and things like that, and I already had contracts to make sure the details, so I knew what I owed them, and I didn't invoice the customer until the work was done because I knew my customers, again, national accounts, I knew who they were, I've worked with them for years. And I had that procedure already down, and we'll talk about that in another video. But even though I had that, when I would get the invoice, what I would do is I would make sure that my bookkeeper wrote the invoice for my customer. So I'd have the invoice in my hand from my subcontractor, and I would have the invoice that I was going to invoice my customer. So I'd put those two together, and I would copy or staple them together. And then I always kept a little sticker, and I don't know if you can see it, but it says my initials on there. I would say, okay, JG, and I would stamp the bill to be paid, that it was complete. So I always have a program, by the way, to make sure that the work that the contractor said they were doing was indeed done, and done according to what the customer wanted. So at that point I would stamp, give it to the bookkeeper and say, I need a check, or I need you to send a check out to this customer. And that's where I talked to on some of the other podcasts that would really tick me off. for a bookkeeper. Even after I told some of them I wanted paid next check run, they would still, well, it's not 30 days, which is stupid. Why would I want to hold on to this money for 30 days when I would ingratiate myself to these contractors that worked for me, the subs, and also the parts people that would send me the parts and stuff like that. They would be happy when I paid the bill ahead of time. And I'm not interested in holding on to other people's money. And I'm not interested in ripping other people off. If you're a businessman that want to be in business longer than a year, then you got to have integrity. You got to pay your bills. But you also have to make sure that they're legitimate bills that you're paying. I remember early on when I first got a bookkeeper, she sort of handed me all these checks. Oh, I got to get them signed. I got to get them signed. Yeah. It's like, whoa, hold on. Where's the documentation? Where's the proof that the work was done? Where are these parts going to that we're buying? And, I'd go through all that, and she would always try to sneak in somewhere on the checks, an extra check. And one time I said, what in the world's going on here? And she said, well, I should have done this check last week. And I was just hoping that you would sign it so I could clear off my desk. And I said, no, I'm not going to sign it. I said, you got to give me the proof. And why are you holding on to these things for all this time period? And she would kind of giggle and everything else. And then I realized that that's probably not the bookkeeper I want. I want someone who is a professional who actually knows it. And that's the last point on this accounting. When you have a bookkeeper, they got to be honest. They got to be honest. They can screw with your books, man, and they can screw you up and things like that. I had a bookkeeper one time when I was doing the daily report. I could see, my liabilities and my assets at the end of that report that I got each day. And one time, I noticed I didn't have any liabilities anymore, but my assets doubled. And I went to the person and I said, what are you doing? What's up with this? How did I earn all this money overnight? And I paid all my bills on these assets, on these liabilities? And of course she went, oh, I screwed up. I think she was spending more time daydreaming about the future, her future, or going to Disneyland this week or something like that. But she didn't last long because she was unprofessional. You got to have someone in that position that you trust. And not only trust, but they can actually do the work. Now, if you don't know accounting yourself, well then take accounting courses, okay? You don't have to learn all the big stuff, that's in accounting and everything else. Sometimes that, bigger companies need to know that, Fortune 500 companies that have 100 employees. But if you're a small business owner, you should know your assets and your liabilities. Now, assets, liquid assets, your cash and bank, things like that, and your liabilities, things that have to be paid, rent, utilities, payroll, things like that. And that should be your working stuff, and you should have working capital. We already talked about all that. But if you're going to do something, you're going to take my suggestion and you're going to do QuickBooks, then your QuickBooks, then you need to learn QuickBooks. You need to study it and stuff like that. And you need to understand it because you should be able to jump in. And this is where I screwed up. Okay, I'm going to be honest with you. I didn't always do this. I look back and I say, man, I needed to spend a lot more time with all these things, these top 5 things, but especially with accounting because it can really get screwed up. You got to know how to be your own bookkeeper. And even if you own a big company, something? You should learn bookkeeping to the point to where you can discover if your accounting department is actually doing what they're supposed to do. And you should have daily meetings with them. I had daily meetings and I had a small to medium-sized company. So daily, every single day, I knew where I was financially. So thank you for watching the video. Again, please give me a thumbs up and please subscribe. Those things make a difference. And remember that verse that I gave you. Know the conditions of your flock. Give careful attention to your herds. So if you're flipping in this area, you'll go out of business. And I know a lot of people that have gone out of business. They've gone bankrupt because they were not paying attention. For riches do not endure forever. That's, sometimes people get wealthy and they forget. And I have also in the past screwed up in these areas. So riches do not endure forever, and a crown is not secure for all generations. Now, of course, you're not going to have a crown, okay? That's talking about leadership. That's talking about, possibility of politics, paying attention there in that area. But the flocks one is about your company. You're shepherding your company pretty much, and that's what it's about. Really good wisdom in Proverbs. Thank you for watching. I very much appreciate it. Hope you have a great day.